y'all, welcome back to the Book Stamp. My name is Kate, and today I'm going to be going through all 123 books that I read in the year 2020. So since I read 123 books, which was way above my yearly reading goal pre-pandemic that I set, I'm not going to spend a long time on any of the books because otherwise we'll be here for 4 hours and nobody wants that. So I'm just going to sort of give a brief kind of one sentence review, feeling, if I recommend it for each book that I read in the year 2020. And especially for the first half of the year before I started my booktube channel, I really haven't talked about a lot of these books. So, and then starting in the month of August, I have a monthly wrap up for every month that goes into more detail about the books. So if you're interested in any of those, I will go ahead and put in the cards. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first book I read in 2020 was The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore. I read this on audio, and it is basically the story of the women who painted radium for America's soldiers, and it sort of tells the story of the workers' rights abuses that were committed and the medical ramifications of the work that a lot of these women did. And it is this really sort of grotesque, gory story, but is so focused on the women and is really powerful narrative. The second book I read was A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer, which is a Beauty and the Beast retelling that is the third book I think just came out in the series, and I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars, but I just didn't care enough about the story to keep reading it, so I haven't continued with the series, and I don't know that I will. I also read Women Talking by Miriam Toews, which is a story, it's a fictional story based on the real life scenario of this group of Mennonite women in South America, where the men would drug the women and then rape them at night, and it's sort of a fictionalized retelling of that story, and I just found it such a beautiful, captivating, heart-wrenching story. It was so well written, and I'm planning on rereading it this year as well. Then I read 10% Happier by Dan Harris, which is basically his sort of own memoir about his journey with meditation and how he, how it has helped him. And this was actually the book that sort of spurred me into my own meditation journey and takes sort of a skeptic's approach, and I highly recommend this. Then I read Women of Resistance, Poems for a New Feminism, which is a poetry collection sort of collected after the 2016 election and spurring social movements. I've already given it on to my sister, and it is sort of a wide breadth of poetry that I thought was okay. Then I read Lab Girl by Hope Jahren, which I've talked about a bunch on my channel, but this is a science memoir by Hope that is so well written and one of my favorite books of 2020. Then I read The Fuck It Diet, which is a anti-diet book about sort of learning how to listen to your own body and what diet culture has really taught us about our bodies. I also read Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor, which I love Flannery O'Connor and wanted to read one of her novels. I read The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, which I cannot recommend enough. Such a great classic sci-fi work. I read Jesus Crawdad Death by Betsy Phillips, which is a Third Man Records short story collection that I truly, truly loved, and I think way more people should read this. I read Lucy Negro Redux, which is one of my favorite poetry collections of 2020, and it has also been adapted into a ballet by the Nashville Ballet, and I think way more people should read this. I also read Counting Descent by Clint Smith, who wrote this poetry collection that I absolutely love, and I bought after hearing him speak at a leadership seminar, and I think more people should read his work. He also has a book coming out in 2021. I also read Dark Lover, which is sort of the classic Black Dagger Brotherhood start, and I didn't really love it, but I think I might continue with the series, but it's basically a vampire paranormal romance. Also read Talking Back by Bell Hooks, which I love Bell Hooks, one of my favorite feminist writers and people, and I want to read more of her work. I also read Dune, which I didn't super love, but I'm very excited for the movie and was sort of a classic science fiction book that I wanted to read. I also read Kindred by Octavia Butler, which was one of the best books that I read. So good, highly recommend it, great science fiction. I read Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler, which is one of the weirdest books that I read in 2020. It's really unlike anything else and is definitely something I think more people, especially people who want to get into queer literature, should read. So read The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, which is another sort of classic young adult children's literature that I hadn't read and really wanted to. And so I read this. I read A Woman Is No Man by Etta Froome, which was in my top 10 books of 2020. I read An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. The audiobook is very, very good. Highly recommend. I also read Southernmost by Silas House. This also made my top 20 of 2020. Silas House is one of my new favorite authors. Highly recommend. I read The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher. I went through like a real Carrie Fisher phase here for a little bit and read some of her memoirs. I also read Uncanny Valley by Anna Wiener, which is a Silicon Valley memoir video book that I really enjoyed. I read The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin, which mediocre, meh. I found it interesting, but there's definitely better books out there. I read We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, which it was okay. Again, sort of a 3-star book. I read The Feather Thief by Kirk Wallace Johnson, one of my favorite books. Highly recommend if you love like not gory true crime. I read The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo, and I don't know, I don't think I'd recommend reading it. I read Educated by Tara Westover. I didn't really think it lived up to the hype, but it was engaging. I read Champion by Marie Lu to finish out the Legend series. I read Wishful Drinking by Carrie Fisher. Again, more Carrie Fisher. And Hunger, A Memoir of My Body by Roxane Gay. This was my first Roxane Gay, and I definitely want to read more of her work. I also read Severance by Ling Ma when, the pandemic started and I wanted to read pandemic lit for whatever reason, but it's pretty good. I read Outlander by Diana Gabaldon for the first time. Loved the show. The book is really, really good too. Read The Great Alone, my first Kristen Hanna. Absolutely loved it. Read Untamed by Glennon Doyle. Also loved Untamed. I read The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, one of my favorite books and series of 2020. Highly recommend for fantasy. I read The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black to finish off whatever the Cruel Prince series is called. I think The Cruel Prince, though, is my favorite in the series. I read A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, which I think would be great to read to your kid, but it doesn't hold up as well as I think some of her other works do. I read The Price of Salt by Claire Morgan, or also known as Carol, and I don't know, I'm kind of ambivalent about it. I didn't really like it that much. I read Love in the Time of Cholera, which I hated and do not recommend anyone should read. I read The Gravity of Us by Phil Stamper, which I really loved. One of my favorite YAs of the year. It was so warm fuzzies. Look at the cover, look at it. I read Alana, The First Adventure. This was I reread the entire Alana series and didn't end up loving it as much as I remembered, but still definitely loved the series overall. I read Once and Future, which is a King Arthur retelling by Amy Rose Capetta and Cormac McCarthy, which was queer and gay and just amazing. I read She Said, which sort of tells the story of the Harvey Weinstein scandal, and I really liked this telling of it. I read In the Hands of the Goddess, another of the Alana books. I read Children of Blood and Bone, which I didn't really love, but I'm considering reading the second one in the series. I read Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. She said was better. I read The Poetry of Sappho. Get some more classics in. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good and interesting. I read Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jake Kristoff, and it was good. I don't know that I'm going to continue though. I read The Woman Who Rides Like a Man, again for the Song of Alina series. I read Eleanor Oliphant Is Completely Fine, which was good. I didn't really love it as much as a lot of other people did, but it definitely wasn't my kind of book. And I read Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams, favorite books of all time, loved it, highly recommend. And I read The Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu, which he's now come out and said some really gross things about the Chinese government, and so I feel weird about that whole series as a whole now. Moving on. I also read Normal People by Sally Rooney, and I thought it was okay. I didn't really get the hype but I think it's kind of like Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine, where it's just not really my type of book. Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which I did not like at all. I know I'm like an outlier there. I read The Hidden Life of Trees, which I read audio. Do not recommend reading that via audiobook. I read Dear Girls by Ali Wong. I just wanted to rewatch her stand-up. I read Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore, which I did not like and cannot recommend. The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I thought it was fine. I thought it was a really good setup and it kind of let me down at the end. I read Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe, which was amazing, perfect, beautiful, loved it. And I read Anne of Green Gables, which I'd never read before and absolutely loved Anne of Green Gables. I also read The Fire This Time, which is it's not short stories, it's like an essay anthology collection about race in America, edited by Jessamine Ward, and absolutely recommend this book. It is very powerful. I read The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which is a retelling of the Trojan War. Oh, I loved it. Top books of the year. I also read The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett, and this was my honorable mentions of 2020. It was so good. I love it so much. If you haven't seen this on BookTube, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but you should read it. I also read Norma Jean Baker of Troy, which is a play by Anne Carson that sort of compares Marilyn Monroe and Helen of Troy, and I found it really, really good and really loved it. I read The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, which is one of the best fantasy books written in the last 20 years. Absolutely phenomenal. If you love fantasy, read the trigger warnings and then read this book. I also read The Dark Forest, which same issues that I don't really want to talk about it. I read A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green, one of my favorite books of the year. Absolutely loved it. The duology is fantastic. I think more people should read it, and even if you're not a science fiction person, I think it still is a great book. I also read White Trash, which is sort of a history of white people in America and class, and found it very informative. I also read Linus Rampant, I still can't pronounce that right. To finish off the Song of a Lioness series. I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is so good. I loved it so much. Everybody go read it right now. I read The Grace Year by Kim Liggett, which is one of my least favorite books of the year. Absolutely hated it. I did not like it at all. I read The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, which is absolutely a required reading for any white person in America. I also read The Obelisk Gate, which is the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. Loved it. I think the fifth season is my favorite, though, of the three. And I read The Women's War by Jenna Glass, which is kind of a feminist fantasy that isn't super feminist, but I did really love the character work in this, so I did really enjoy it. I read Macbeth, which is my favorite Shakespeare, and I finished The Stone Sky, which wraps up the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, one of my favorite series that I read in 2020. I read Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Robertson, which I didn't like. I found it just kind of average YA fantasy. I read Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Absolutely one of the best books I read in 2020. 100% deserving of the hype that it gets. I read The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. I read this on audio and that was not the right way to read it, so I'm hoping to reread it here in the next year or two to give it a better, fairer shot. I read The Long Petal of the Sea by Isabel Allende, and it was my first Isabel Allende. So good. Absolutely loved it. The audio is so good. I read The Cove by Ron Rash, which is a pretty good, like, atmospheric Appalachian mystery tale that I really enjoyed. I read Space Struck by Paige Lewis, which is one of my favorite poetry collections that I read in 2020, as you can see from the so many tabs, so many. I read Cemetery Boys, which was probably one of the most important books that I read this year, and in terms of representation and cultural heritage, and it was just so beautifully done and well written. It was a joy to read. Also read The Rise of Kyoshi by F.C. Lee, which just really hit that Avatar hole in my heart, and I really enjoyed it. I read This Is How You Lose the Time War, which was my second favorite book of 2020. I absolutely love this book. I cannot wait to reread it. It is one of the most beautifully written books I read in 2020. And then, back to back, I also read my favorite book of 2020, which was Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi, which just really, I've never felt so seen by a book. It was phenomenal. More people should read it. It should have been on everybody's best of list because it was so good. And then I read Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which is a Beauty and the Beast retelling that I just found kind of fell a little bit flat, especially in the second half of the book. And then I read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which was my first dark academia thriller book, and it gave me a stomachache. And then I read The Girl Who Drank the Moon, which was such a beautiful, like, middle grade children's tale that I just absolutely loved. Read it on audio, it's so good. I read The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal and absolutely loved this book about sort of an alternate timeline US space race with women astronauts. It was amazing. I read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which was weird and creepy and gross and so good. I read Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, which completely cemented Yaa Gyasi as one of my all-time favorite writers, if not my favorite author of all time. I read The Coal Tattoo by Silas House. I'm trying to read a lot more Silas House, and I love his writing as well for Appalachian stories. And I read the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, which was kind of just a fun, campy ride. The audiobook is really good. I also read American Royals, which is like the perfect feel-good sort of check out of doom scrolling romance read that I really enjoyed. I also read Fangs, which is a comic by Sarah Anderson, which is just so cute and dark and witty and cerebral, and I absolutely loved it. And I read Backstagers, which was a graphic novel collection that I read. Some more graphic novels include Nimona and Lumberjanes by Noelle Stevenson, which I also really liked. I read My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, which I just didn't feel lived up to the hype. I don't know. I might give it a second shot. I read First Test by Tamora Pierce, which is the second series after Song of a Lioness that I'm starting to reread, and I loved it so much. Kel is my true hero. I read Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. Didn't really like it. Don't think it's worth the 800 pages. I read Axiom's End by Lindsay Ellis, who is a YouTuber who I did really enjoy her book. I thought it was pretty good. I read Earthlings by Sayaka Murata, which is not for everyone, but definitely super weird and interesting. And I read Elatsue. Oh, just such a good YA mystery thriller fantasy book. Just all the things, I loved it. And then I read Homebody by Rupi Kaur. I didn't think it really lived up to the hype. Maybe I'm just over Rupi Kaur at this point. I read The Disaster Tourist, which I thought was really good. I really liked it. The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, one of the best books I read in 2020. Absolutely loved it. They're There by Tommy Orange. So good. Such an important book and just phenomenally well written. Legendborn by Tracy Deonn was my favorite YA fantasy of the year. It and Elatsue are like so close tied together. I read the selected poems of Wendell Berry over the year and really enjoyed reading that. Catherine House. I still don't know how I feel about Catherine House. Does anybody know how they feel about it? It's weird. I read The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton, which I didn't really like. I just thought it was okay. I read The Tourist Attraction, which I don't even remember. That's how memorable it was. I read Anna on the Edge, which was so good. Such an important book with non-binary rep for middle grade kids. So important. I read Such a Fun Age by Kelly Reid, another very important book that I didn't like because it was good. I just didn't like it. I read Followers by Megan Angelo, which was one of like my most surprising books that I really loved for sort of a sci-fi Black Mirror type book. I read Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson, which I really enjoyed. It's a beautifully written book. I read The Other Einstein by Marie Benedict, which I didn't really enjoy or like. I read An American Sunrise and Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings by Joy Harjo, both of which were excellent. I love Joy Harjo so much. And finally, I read Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark, which was another of the best books that I read in 2020. So good. Wow. 123 books. Hopefully this video is not 2 hours long. I tried to go pretty quick. But yeah, those are all the books that I read in 2020.